Hi, greetings, it's me, Dr. Paul Gerhardt, and this is the third video in our Essentials of Negotiation series. This video will talk about strategies and tactics of integrative negotiation. So let me give you an overview of what we're going to talk about. Integrative negotiation allows both sides to achieve their objectives. Discussion and mutual exploration often suggest alternatives where both parties gain. Negotiators make one of three mistakes: failing to negotiate when they should, negotiating when they should not, and then negotiating but with the wrong strategy. Rather than assume a win-lose situation, look for win-win solutions, as you're probably going to hear me say in every video. Successful integrative negotiator traits include honesty and integrity, an abundance mentality, maturity, systems orientation, and then superior listening skills. So, the processes of integrative negotiations include creating a free flow of information, attempting to understand the other negotiator's real needs and objectives, emphasizing things parties have in common, searching for solutions that meet the goals and objectives of both parties, and then managing integrative negotiations involves creating a process to identify and define the problem, surface interests and needs, generate alternative solutions, and evaluate selective alternatives. Create a free flow of information. Effective information exchange promotes the development of good integrative solutions. Failure to reach integrative agreements is often linked to the failure to exchange information to allow identifying integrative options. For the necessary exchange to occur, negotiators must be willing to value their true objectives and to listen to each other carefully. In contrast, a willingness to share information is not a characteristic of distributive bargaining situations. The parties distrust each other, conceal and manipulate information, and wish to learn about the other for their own competitive advantage. Attempting to understand the other negotiator's real needs and objectives, you must understand the other's needs before helping to satisfy them. Remember, seek first to understand, then to be understood. Realize the other priorities are not your own. Stimulate information exchange. Exchange information about your priorities for particular issues, but not necessarily about your positions on those issues. Make an effort to understand what the other side really wants to achieve. This is in contrast to distributive bargaining. If one negotiator is inexperienced, the other may need to assist them in discovering their underlying needs and interests. Emphasize things in common between parties and then minimize differences. Negotiators may require a different outlook or frame of reference. Individual goals may need to be redefined through collaborative efforts directed toward a collective goal. At times, the collective goal is clear and obvious, and at other times, it's not so clear or easy to keep in sight. Search for solutions that meet the needs and objectives of both sides. The success of integrative negotiation depends on the search for solutions that meet the needs and objectives of both sides. In this process, negotiators must be firm but flexible. Firm about their primary interests and needs, but flexible about how these needs and interests are met. In a competitive interaction, negotiators ensure that what the other obtains does not diminish their own accomplishments. Negotiators may block the other from obtaining their objectives due to a strong desire to win. In contrast, integrative negotiation requires both negotiators to define and pursue their own goals, but also be mindful of the other's goals and search for solutions satisfying both sides. If the objective of one party is to get more than the other, successful integrative negotiation can and will be difficult. So let's talk about the steps in the integrative negotiation process. The first 3 steps are important for creating value. The fourth involves claiming value. So here are the steps are. 1, identify and define the problem. 2, surface interests and needs. 3, generate alternative solutions. And then finally 4, evaluate and select alternatives. It's important that the processes to create value precede those to claim value for 2 reasons. First, the creating value is more effective when it's done collaboratively and without a focus on who gets what. And then secondly, because claiming value involves distributive bargaining processes and may derail the focus on creating value and may even harm the relationship unless it is introduced effectively. So let's talk about step number 1. Identify and define the problem. The problem identification step is often the most difficult one, but critical. Define the problem in a way that is mutually acceptable to both sides. Problem definition is and should be separate from any effort to generate or choose alternatives. State the problem with an eye towards practicality and comprehensiveness. State the problem as a goal and identify obstacles to attaining the goal. Depersonalize the problem. Separate the problem from the search for solutions. It's important not to jump to solutions until the problem is fully defined. And then step 2, surface interests and needs. Interests are the underlying concerns, needs, desires, or fears that motivate a negotiator to take a particular position. Understanding interests allows negotiators to invent a solution that meets the interests of both sides. A solution that was not apparent before negotiation. When 2 parties begin negotiation, they expose their positions or demands. In distributed bargaining, negotiators trade positions back and forth, attempting to achieve a settlement as close to their targets as possible. In integrative negotiations, both negotiators pursue the other's thinking and logic to define what motivated them to arrive at their goals. Presumably, if both parties understand the other's motivating factors, they may recognize similar interests and envision new options that both will endorse. Let's talk about types of interest. Several types of interests may be at stake, and each type may be either intrinsic, that's their party's value it in itself, or instrumental. The parties value it because it helps them derive other outcomes in the future. Substantive interests are related to the focal issues under negotiation. Process interests are related to how the negotiation unfolds. Relationship interests speak to the value of the ongoing relationship between parties and the future of that relationship. Interest in principle occurs when certain principles deeply held by the parties serve as the dominant guides to their actions. Here's some observations on interest. There's almost always more than one type of interest underlying negotiation. The categories are not exclusive. Parties can have different types of interests at stake. Parties may differ on questions or principle or process. Interests often stem from deeply rooted human needs or values, such as Maslow's well-known hierarchy of needs. Surfacing interest, ask yourself what you want from the negotiation and why you want it. Asking probing questions of the other party to determine their interests. Surfacing interest is not always easy or to one's best advantage. Focusing on interests alone oversimplifies or conceals the real dynamics of a conflict. Step number 3, generate alternative solutions. The objective is to create a variety of options or possible solutions to the problem. Techniques for generating alternative solutions fall into 2 general categories. The first requires negotiators to reframe the problem to create a win-win alternative out of what earlier appeared to be win-lose problems. The second takes the problem as given and creates a long list of options from which the parties can choose. In integrative negotiation over a complex problem, both types of techniques may be used or even intertwined. Inventing options. Generating alternative solutions by redefining the problem or problem set. Some techniques in this category call for the parties to define their underlying needs and to develop alternatives to meet them. There's the log roll, where parties trade off for preferred outcomes on one issue. They expand the pie so both sides achieve their objectives. Modifying or the resource pie to benefit both sides. Finding a bridge solution to invent new options to meet the needs of both sides. Non-specific compensation, one side wins and the other is compensated. Cut costs for compliance, one side wins and the other has costs minimized. Superior ordination, where differences are replaced by other interests. And then compromise for parties. Generating alternative solutions to the problem is given. These approaches can be used by negotiators themselves or by a number of other parties, like brainstorming. Avoiding judging and evaluating solutions. It's important to separate the people from the problem and then be exhaustive by asking outsiders. Surveys, they can be conducted in a short time, but parties cannot benefit from seeing and hearing each other's ideas. And then electronic brainstorming, where the facilitator asks questions, participants type their anonymous responses into a computer which aggregates and displays interest to the group as a whole. There's step number 4, where you evaluate select alternatives. There are a series of steps for guidance. Definitions and standards, alternatives, evaluation, and then selection. Negotiators should weigh or rank order each option against clear criteria. You may need to return to definitions or return standards for clarifying. Parties will engage in a decision-making process, debating the merits of each negotiator's preferred options and agree on the best options. Pay attention to the relationship and make sure the process does not harm the relationship at this stage. Remember, relationships are fragile. Guidelines for evaluating and selecting alternatives include a narrow of the range for solution options. Evaluate solutions on the basis of quality, standards, and acceptability. Agree to the criteria in advance of evaluating options. Be willing to justify personal preferences. Be alert to the influence of intangibles in selection options. Use subgroups to evaluate complex options and then take the time to cool off. Explore different ways to log roll. Explore differences in risk preference. Explore differences in expectations. Explore differences in time preferences. Keep decisions tentatively and conditional until all aspects of the final proposal are complete. Minimize formality record keeping until agreements are closed. Here are some factors that facilitate successful integrative negotiation. Successful integrative negotiation occurs when the parties are predisposed to finding a mutually acceptable joint solution. Here we review 7 factors that facilitate a successful goal, faith in one's own problem-solving ability, a belief in the validity of the other party's position, the motivation and commitment to work together, trust, clear and accurate communication, and finally an understanding of the dynamics of integrative negotiation. Some common objective or goal are really key. There are three types of goals: common, shared, and joint. They may be facilitated in the development of integrative agreements. A common goal is one that all parties share equally, each one benefiting in a way that would not be possible if they did not work together. A shared goal is one that both parties work towards, but that benefits each party differently. And then a joint goal is one that involves individuals with different personal goals agreeing to combine them in a collective effort. The key element of integrative negotiation is the belief that all sides can benefit and they will be better off working in cooperation rather than by working independently or competitively. Faith in one's problem-solving ability. Parties who believe they can work together are more likely to do so. Expertise in the problem area strengthens understanding of the problem's complexity, nuances, and possible solutions. Expertise increases the negotiator's knowledge base and confidence. Both are necessary to approach the problem with an open mind. Direct experience in negotiation increases the negotiator's understanding of the bargaining process. And it's important to know that there's evidence that knowledge of integrative tactics leads to an increase in integrative behavior. Taken together, these suggest that faith is one's ability at integrative negotiations is positively related to successful integrative negotiations. A belief in the validity of one's own position and the other's perspective. Integrative negotiation requires negotiators to accept both their own and the other's attitudes, interests, and desires as valid. You must believe in the validity of your own perspective, that what you believe is worth fighting for and should not be compromised. You should also accept the validity of the other party's perspective. The purpose of integrative negotiation is not to challenge the other's perspective, but to incorporate it into the solution. The other's view should be valued no less or no more than your own. The motivation and commitment to work together is very important. For integrative negotiation to succeed, the parties must be willing to make their own needs explicit, to identify similarities, and to recognize and accept differences. Ways to enhance motivation and commitment to problem solving. Negotiators agree they gain more by working together than separately. Negotiators can commit to each other in pre-settlement settlements. Settlement is a legally binding written agreement. The settlement occurs in advance of negotiations. The settlement resolves only a subset of the issues. Negotiators can create an umbrella agreement that provides a framework for future discussions. And this allows flexibility in the relationship for claiming value. Here's the key: trust. Trust is the glue of all relationships, and trust must be earned. Mistrust inhibits collaboration. There are three tactics to elicit information from the other negotiator when they mistrust you. Share information and encourage reciprocity. Negotiate multiple issues simultaneously and make multiple offers at the same time. To develop trust effectively, each negotiator must believe that the other parties choose to cooperate. Believe that this is a signal of the other's honesty, openness, and commitment to a joint solution. Generating trust is a complex, uncertain process. It depends in part on how the parties behave and in part on personal characteristics. Clear and accurate communication is essential. Negotiators must be willing to share information about themselves, revealing what they want and why. Negotiators must understand the communication or meaning each party attaches to their statements. And then mutual understanding is the responsibility of both sides. Multiple communication channels are helpful. They clarify formal communication or facilitate the exchange of information. If the formal channels break down, make sure messages are consistent. When strong negative feelings, when any party is inclined to dominate, negotiators may create formal, structured procedures for communications. Ladies and gentlemen, in a nutshell, that is the keys to strategy and tactics of integrated negotiations. I hope you've enjoyed the video and have taken something away from it. Again, remember, you get to choose how you feel about anything. Have a great day.